Recently, Vladmir Kramnik has been muted on chess.com due to his accusations he's been making about cheating in the chess world, particularly online on chess.com. And chess.com decided to mute his account and cancel his blog so he cannot express his concerns any longer. So, not really sure how this all came to be or how I really feel about that. But chess.com said his allegations were baseless. So I'm not sure where they're going to go from here. But in the spirit of everything going on, I have a game between Vladmir Kramnik and Magnus Carlsen, a blitz game. Let's dive in. Let's take a look. This one's a good one. Let's go ahead. Okay. So in this position, in this game, we have Nimzowicz Indian attack here. Magnus Carlsen playing with the white pieces and Kramnik playing with the black pieces. Okay. So here in this position, I would probably play something like knight c3, I think. That's how I would play it, and that's fine. But Magnus plays c3 because he's Magnus. He does whatever he wants. And Kramnik just leaves here and just attacks this pawn. So Magnus just doesn't worry about it. He just is concerned about development. Now, what happens if we take the pawn? Nothing really. I mean, Magnus gets a bishop on a good diagonal with tempo. And after, let's say, the queen moves back to b6, Magnus would take here. So he would get his material back. There's really no way the black queen could defend this pawn. So Magnus would get his pawn back. Okay. So for that reason, Kramnik does not take and plays a5. And Magnus storms forward with his pawns here on the queen side. And interesting, I would have played b5 here, attacking the knight and forcing the knight to go back. But maybe Magnus didn't want to defend this pawn because this pawn's hard to defend. Maybe he has to play this now, and not sure if he liked that. Maybe Kramnik would play b6, forcing him to kind of take, and maybe he didn't want that. I'm not sure, but anyway, Magnus plays a3, and after b6, we have takes, castles, bishop a6. Kramnik has a bad bishop, and he wants to trade his bad bishop off for Magnus's pretty good bishop, right? It's a pretty good bishop. So they trade. Magnus gets his knight into the game. Again, good players, develop pieces. Okay, queen c2, another developing move. And Kramnik brings his knight back to b6. Now, I'm not really totally sure what his idea here was. Probably just to sink the knight in at c4 at some point and just control this square. So Magnus plays c4, and Magnus's response to that pretty much confirms that that's what Vladmir's idea was. At least that's what Magnus was concerned about. So after c4, and if you want to take a look at why that's somewhat important, let's say Magnus does not do that. Now, Kramnik would just put his knight there, and even if we have a trade, then the queen comes in here, and you'll see that this is stopping the pawn from moving. That means the bishop's closed, the pieces become passive, and Kramnik's getting more space. So no chess player wants that. That's not comfortable. Definitely not Magnus. So that's why Magnus plays c4 here. We have a trade, but this is really nice. Magnus doesn't take the bishop back like 99.9% of us would. Magnus plays this nice in-between move, and here's why it's very important. If Magnus were to take the bishop right away, now we have a trade here. And if we take back, now black can play knight c4, believe it or not. Now, if we take the knight, Kramnik would just come in here and take the knight, and this pawn's isolated, and it's going to get bullied, and it's not really a fun position to play. Now, you might have been asking yourself, well, what happens if the knight comes down here and we take the queen? Well, black would just take our queen. And if we take the rook, black would take back the rook, has an open rook here, and is doing perfectly fine. So Magnus didn't like that. So Magnus played this move instead, an in-between move, hitting the knight and queen, but more importantly, hitting the queen. So black has to answer that first. So black actually handled it pretty poorly. Kramnik should have just came back here. And then after Magnus takes the bishop, now the knight's attack, just bring the knight to d8 and just play. That's probably the best way to go. But again, this is a blitz game, and Kramnik is a strong player. He knows how, so he appreciates how strong Magnus Carlsen is, and he just wants to mix things up, and he doesn't want to really play into Magnus's plan and give Magnus too much I guess, activity here. So Kramnik gives up the queen and brings his bishop back here. Magnus attacks the knight. The knight jumps back to d5. Magnus attacks the knight again. The knight's defended, but then Magnus just takes over this open b file. And this pawn here on a6 is defended, so black cannot take, or else the queen would take black. So now Kramnik's piling up on this pawn. Pretty basic idea, but it works. It looks pretty good, right? Well, Magnus just jumps in here. Now, what's the idea behind this move? Well, let's say the rook takes. Magnus would take the knight and hit the rook. So if Kramnik takes back, now Magnus just scoops up this rook and is really, really doing really well here. Okay, so what happens if we take with the knight? Well, then Magnus would just take this pawn. The knight's blocking the connection between the rook and pawn. So this is actually a really good defensive move. Okay, so Kramnik comes in here and attacks the rook. Now you see why Kramnik wanted to keep this bishop on the board. Very powerful, covering a lot of squares, has a tremendous scope to it. It's like a sniper, and it's allowing this knight to hit the rook here and embed himself into white's position. So what does Magnus do here? Magnus just moves the rook up one more space and is still defending this pawn. Okay, Kramnik's idea, though, the whole time was to hit the rook. So after the rook moves, just use that as a pivot square to come to a4, attack this rook and this pawn. So Magnus just jumps back here very calmly, moves the rook away, and defends the pawn. Okay, now Kramnik takes, and Magnus does not take back like I said he would. This time, he just brings his knight to the game, which the computer thinks is a mistake. So Magnus should have listened to me, I guess. But anyway, Kramnik attacks the rook. Magnus just says, no, 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 I'm going to bring it to b7. The rooks belong on the 7th rank. So after Kramnik moves back, Magnus just creates some luft for his king to take out all the back rank mate possibilities in the future. Now he doesn't have to worry about it. Also, just taking away the square again for the knight in case this pawn wants to move. Now this knight cannot jump in here because this pawn's also covering f4. So these are very important, small but very important concepts. Okay, now this pawn is being hit twice by the knight and the rook. So Magnus just says, I can't defend that, but I can attack something bigger. I can attack your knight. And when the knight moves, he simply attacks it again. And now he takes this pawn. Now what's the point? After black takes a pawn, Magnus just trades the knights and brings his rook into the game, keeping up the initiative, just simply attacking stuff that's weak. He's just simply attacking stuff here. Black has to defend it, though. And then we have queen f3. Computer says that's an inaccuracy, but inaccuracies really don't count. I don't really count them. It doesn't matter. It's a decent move by Magnus. He's just piling pressure on f7, trying to provoke a mistake from Kramnik, which he kind of does. This move is not great. Now Magnus plays e4 here, which is the computer says is a blunder, but again, does not really change the evaluation at all. So I'm not sure how that's a blunder. That's just beyond me. I don't think it's really a blunder. Maybe the computer thought it was a blunder at the time, but corrected itself. I'm not sure. But it does give up the pawn, which may seem like a blunder because now this pawn is passed. And this rook can eventually come behind it, possibly, and escort the pawn to a1, the queening square. Magnus just calmly brings his king off the back rank. And now we have Kramnik moving his rook away so the pawn can escort itself down here. So just pretty much unveiling the red carpet for the pawn. But Magnus jumps right behind that pawn because when it comes to pass pawns, offensively you want to be behind the pawn and defensively you want to be behind the pawn. You always want to be behind the pawn. So black just defends it. Magnus goes again for f3, putting more pressure on f7. And okay, Kramnik tries to kick out the knight, but it doesn't work because the knight's going to jump in here anyway. And now we have a fatal mistake. This is the biggest mistake of the game. And now knight h6 is the best move. And after king h8, we can just go back here. If the king comes here, then we have this. So that's not good. The bishop can't take because of the rook. So, and if black takes here, we have this, and this is not good. So, now Magnus plays G4. just simply attacking this pawn, and Kramnik just takes the knight. Now, what does Magnus do here? Did he just give up a knight for no reason? Of course not. He took the pawn here, capitalizing on a pin. But not only that, there's no way to defend the rook. The rook is being attacked twice. It's pinned, so it can't move. That's why pins are so good. There's no other piece that can defend this rook. And here, Kramnik could resign. It's mate in 3, but he played this first, which doesn't do anything because Magnus can just take the rook. Again, he cannot take back because his rook is pinned. So now he just gave up mate. That's the game. Anyway, thought that was pretty enjoyable. Not sure what's going on with this whole scandal situation, if he'll get his blog back, if Kramnik will be able to, speak and express himself again on chess.com. We'll see. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that game. If you like this content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe below. I'll catch you next time.